Good afternoon, good evening, or good morning, everyone, wherever you are. My name is Xiaohua Yang. I am the director of University of San Francisco's China Business Studies Initiative, or CBSI, and a professor of international business. Welcome to the President's Dialogue on Bay Area and China relations under Biden administration. CBSI is thrilled to host today's event. CBSI is the San Francisco Silicon Valley-based thought leader, knowledge hub, and a relationship builder for the US business and its connection with China, Asia, and the rest of the world. We are the only research center at the University of San Francisco focusing on international business, leveraging over 500 years of Jesuit tradition of linking global education and commerce, and the Jesuits' historical connections to China. We regularly produce public events like this and host international conferences. We are proud to have Bay Area Council partner with us on today's event. Now it is my pleasure to bring Dr. Sean Randolph, the Senior Director of Bay Area Council's Economic Institute and CBSI's Advisory Board member, to introduce today's topic. Sean, over to you.
Well, thanks very much, Xiaohua. It's a pleasure to be with you all today and also to be on the board of CBSI. Looking forward to that. My job is basically to set the stage for the conversation that's going to follow. And I've been fortunate enough to be in and around China for several decades now and have seen a remarkable amount of change since things first opened up to the present. And it's safe to say we're on new and unfamiliar ground right now. And what I'm going to try to do in the next 5 minutes or so is give a perspective on what's going on in US-China relations at the national level, which will give some context for the conversation that's going to follow on what's happening or could or should happen here in the Bay Area and at the subnational level. So we can talk about several major points: trade, investment, the political temperature, and especially what's happening or isn't happening under President Biden. But just to get going, let's start with the trade war. Most of the tariffs that were put in place under the Trump presidency during the trade war are still in place. About 18 months ago, a phase 1 agreement was reached between the two countries under which various tariffs were removed or scaled back, with the expectation that there would be a phase 2 negotiation that would tackle some of the more difficult structural issues in the relationships, such as state subsidies in China, technology transfer, and issues like that, really the toughest ones. As of today, most of the tariffs that were put in place during the trade war between the US and China, and that is US tariffs on Chinese imports and Chinese tariffs on US exports, are still in place. That means that for consumers in the US, we are paying about a 19% premium at the moment on everything we buy from China. And that in turn has also affected our exports to China, which have sustained themselves rather well, but they have gone down in absolute terms. So in terms of how that's impacted us, there's of course the price premium. It's increased the cost in particular of intermediate goods for manufacturers here. But despite that, I think it's remarkable that imports are actually up. And if you read the papers right now, you'll read about clogged ports in Long Beach and Los Angeles and Oakland. Well, they're clogged with ships coming from China. So China is still a remarkably important trade partner, despite the fact that most of the tariffs enacted over the last 3 years are still in place. Perhaps a bigger issue for us here in the Bay Area and nationally, or at least equally important, is the question of investment. In the mid-2000s, Chinese investment globally expanded rather dramatically, and especially to the United States. And that investment peaked in 2017. and it's declined ever since then. So right now, investment from China is down 90% from its peak in 2017 and falling. That's for a number of reasons. One is nothing to do with politics. It was that Chinese companies were sending a lot of capital out of China. The government there was concerned about the flight of capital, and that it was maybe going too far. And they were also concerned that a lot of big Chinese companies, conglomerates, were maybe getting overextended in fields they weren't expert in overseas. And so the government yanked their chain, forced many of them to divest, and basically put on de facto capital controls. So that really ratcheted down a lot of Chinese investment that was coming here into things like real estate. There was a lot of real estate investment in the Bay Area that slowed to a trickle. Acquisitions, non-tech acquisitions, that's slowed to a trickle. So that has nothing to do with politics. But on the political side, what we have seen is a real ratcheting down of investment in technology, which is a great concern to us here in the Bay Area. That happened in particular in 2018 with the passage of FIRRMA, which was an omnibus bill, a package bill that gave new authority to the Committee on Foreign Investment in the United States, CFIUS, to review inbound investment in the US for security reasons, primarily, although China was not named itself, primarily to look at Chinese investment from a security standpoint. The new rules for FIRRMA are operating now. The staff of FIRRMA is expanding, and it requires investors from China to really put their proposed investments through a ringer. And if they don't go through the process, even if they think they're not under FIRRMA's authority, it has the right to go back after the fact and yank back those investments. So it really is an important hurdle and process for any investment coming in to the United States now. Now, it doesn't preclude Chinese investment in any way. There are ways to deal with FIRRMA, and the issues are around access to technology and control. So legally, you could structure an investment from China where the investor brings in the cash, but doesn't have access to the technology or control. So it's not an absolute bar, but it's a high bar. And I think the challenge for us in the Bay Area especially is there is a list of technologies now under FIRRMA, which is very similar to a list of technologies at the Export Administration of the Commerce Department, which are considered sensitive. Either they're immediate ones we're developing today, or they're called foundational technologies. They're big ones for the future. They're broadly defined. But if you look at that list between nanotechnology and biotechnology and AI and many other things, it's almost everything important in technology. So we have a really high hurdle now for cooperation with China on most major technologies, primarily because of the scrutiny that that's going to receive around any kind of investment. And until 3 years ago, and I think it's still the case, but the numbers are way down, there were 3 big destinations for Chinese investment in the US. It was New York, Los Angeles, and the Bay Area. And for us, that was especially technology. So there's been a big impact in the whole approach nationally to investment from China around technology. I think there's also overlaying all of this, the political temperature between the United States and China. And here we've seen a change in the rhetoric coming out of the Biden administration, which on the whole has been positive. I think a lot of the heat has come out of the rhetoric coming from the White House and the State Department compared to where we were 6 or 8 months ago under the Trump administration. But the issues haven't gone away, and the underlying policies have not changed very significantly, and they're probably not going to change very significantly. So President Biden has described what's happening, the repression of Uyghurs in Xinjiang as genocide. The tensions are very high and rising around Hong Kong and China's de facto abrogation of its agreement with the UK for 50 years of de facto autonomy. So Hong Kong remains a thorny spot in the relationship. think reflecting that, there is a record number of bills before the Congress right now that in some way or another are restrictive of US-China relations or would put various kinds of sanctions or other burdens on the relationship. They won't all make it through Congress, but there are some very, very big ones. There is concern in the background about what China is doing in the South China Sea. There is nervousness about Chinese intentions regarding Taiwan. And we still have issues out there like Huawei that have not gone away. So those are all very important challenges. They do put us on a new footing with China compared to where we were 4 or 5 years ago. But I think the change in tone is important. And that is that the Biden administration, I think, is working on a bipartisan basis. There's a remarkable degree of bipartisan agreement between Republicans, Democrats in Washington about the perception of China and perception of China as being to some degree a threat. And I think what President Biden is doing now really reflects that. And I think we saw it when the Secretary of State, Tony Blinken, met with his counterparts in Alaska a couple of months ago, and it was really all on the table, the points of conflict, but not a lot of agreement. The positive side, though, is rather than just, I think, attacking China as what's happening in the recent past, the Biden administration is talking much more about working with allies, not against China, but to get a greater agreement and more coordination among free market economies, among democracies, about how do we protect our values internationally? How do we make sure that America and the West continue to set technology standards around the world? So there are consensus Western global standards and not coming necessarily from China. Coordination with allies around how we together approach investment from China from a security standpoint. I think we want investment, our European allies want investment, but on what terms? The policy is a lot more pragmatic than it was before. President Biden doesn't describe China as an adversary, it describes it as a competitor. And I've been in conversations recently where I've heard from very authoritative people the phrase that the era of, quote, engagement, which is where we began 15 or 20 years ago, is over, but now it's an era of competition. But the hope is that it's not an era of conflict. And in fact, the Biden administration is looking for opportunities in fields where it can cooperate with China and China can cooperate with us. And the big one, of course, is climate change, where we both have major challenges. We both have a major stake in the outcome. And it's very likely that coming up to the next Paris Climate Accords follow-up in Edinburgh this November, you'll have close alignment and cooperation between the US and China, which hopefully, if there's mutual confidence established that way, can be expanded to other fields. So the bottom line, I think, is that there are a range of difficult issues between the US and China that remain to be resolved, that there is more continuity than change in policy from the Biden administration looking back at the Trump administration, but there is a different tone that does look for the possibility of partnership and cooperation where that's possible. So that's a short summary. And with that, I'm very happy to turn it back to Xiaohua and to Peter for the real conversation this afternoon.
Thank you, Sean, for contextualizing today's conversation. This is very helpful. Now, it is my pleasure to introduce Dr. Peter Lorenzen, Associate Professor of Economics and Director of Master of Sciences in Applied Economics. Peter is a CBSI's Executive Board member, and he will moderate today's dialogue. And for audiences and for all the attendees, please type your questions in Q&A. Thank you.
Just to, again, set the stage here, this is, we had a wonderful introduction from Sean Randolph explaining kind of the big picture of what's going on between the US and China, and how at the policy level, there's been this movement away from the idea of engagement that was prevalent for a long time, and more towards a notion of competition, although we hope avoiding the idea of outright outright conflict, or a truly zero-sum mentality. And so what we're in this conversation now, we're going to have Jim Wunderman, the president of the Bay Area Council, talking more about, from the Bay Area perspective. So from the businesses that are members of the council, what they're seeing, how these developments are affecting their world from their end, what they're observing, and also to what they might hope to get from national and from local policymakers. And similarly, Father Paul Fitzgerald, the president of our University of San Francisco, is going to be talking about the educational aspects of, and really those are very closely intertwined, right? A lot of this is about knowledge, technology, development, and so that has to do with the flow of not just the flow of capital and goods, but the flow of ideas and people, whether as employees or students, back and forth across borders. And so that's why we thought it would be great to have the two of them here to kind of give their perspectives on the different parts of the whole that they both work on. So I thought first maybe Paul could start with giving us a little bit more background about the University of San Francisco and what its historical relationship has been to China. The Jesuits, back to Matteo Ricci centuries ago, have always been an important conduit of exchange between the West broadly and China. And the University of San Francisco, being based in the city with one of the oldest and best established Chinese communities in the U.S., also has a long history of educating Chinese and Chinese Americans. So why don't you just start by filling us in about some of that background and kind of where things stand with the role of Chinese students and scholars in the Bay Area today.
Thank you, Peter, and thanks to everyone who's joining us for this conversation. I cannot stress enough how important it is for the University of San Francisco particularly, but for the 200 Jesuit universities around the world, to be places of deep encounter among people from various cultures. That's the richest kind of education anyone could receive, is to be in a very global conversation. At USF, we have students from 110 countries currently earning bachelor's, master's, or doctoral degrees here. We also happen to host, in terms of history, we host the Ricci Institute, which is 4.5 centuries of the archives of the Jesuits who worked in China, starting in the late 1500s. With Matteo Ricci and Father Charles and Father Fabrice, all the way through today. We still maintain 2 high schools, Huaiyan College in Hong Kong and Huaiyan in Kowloon. And we have now new collaborative relationships with universities across China. Just a little note. So in our first law class in 1916, one of the very first students here was a young person brought to San Francisco by his parents from Guangdong province, Chang Qing Wing, and he was the first Chinese American to pass the California bar. He had a tremendous career as an immigration attorney, helping other Chinese people come to San Francisco, to this Golden Mountain. He sued the San Francisco Police Department 30 times for harassing merchants in Chinatown. He lost every case. He never gave up. He did live long enough to see his daughter graduate from USF Law. He did not live long enough to see USF alumna Heather Fong become chief of police. I think that would have pleased him tremendously. So USF, we have about 8 or 9% of our total student population are international students from China. And as I say, it's a tremendous boon to our campus conversations to have students from many different provinces of China, bringing their perspectives, their interests, their questions. And for them to enjoy, for example, a 4-year undergraduate liberal arts education, majoring in finance or in hospitality management or whatever they want to major in, often to go back home and take over a family business. And, I just like to say that, the kinds of friendships that develop between our Chinese students and students from Sweden, Iceland, Israel, Saudi Arabia, New York and Detroit, become lifelong friendships. Under the George W. Bush administration, consulates and embassies around the world were called upon to develop and promote relationships among 50-year-old people, business leaders. Under the Obama administration, there was a major change in the emphasis, and it was to try to get young people together from countries around the world with young Americans to kind of create those bridges of friendship, those bridges of understanding, those bridges of respect, respectful exchange. And I'm pleased. And then during the Trump administration, things collapsed. We saw 6 to 8% declines in applications and deposits and from Chinese students every year for 4 years. And they were opting for Canada, they were opting for Australia, they were opting for the United Kingdom. We're hoping to turn that around very quickly now that we have a new administration and a new philosophy of welcoming international students again. And by the way, in 2014, international students brought $32 billion into the United States of America. It's one of our best exports is higher education.
Okay, great. Yeah, that's bringing it around again to sort of the economic issue. To the extent that we're concerned about the trade balance, which economists tend to be less concerned than policymakers are. But we're trying to produce things here in the U.S. that the world wants, and education is absolutely one of the most important. For both on the economic side and for all the reasons that Paul was laying out on the in terms of person-to-person interchange and promoting mutual understanding. Jim, the Bay Area Council, you represent the region's most prominent businesses, which by its nature includes most of the world's leading technology firms. As Sean kind of laid out for us, there's been a lot of interchange, with China. China has, in recent years, contrary to a lot of people's beliefs, because of communism, or they have some vague notion of Confucian culture. There was an idea that Chinese people couldn't innovate. Clearly, that's been falsified. Those of us who know the region never really had any doubt, but now the Chinese people have been given the opportunity to create and innovate in business and technology, and have really run with it. And that creates, we've mentioned cooperation and competition. That's kind of creates opportunities for both. So what are you seeing among the people that you work with in the Bay Area in terms of the mix of things? What are some areas of competition, of cooperation, and how is policy affecting that?
Thank you for getting us involved in this, and we appreciate President Fitzgerald. We appreciate the partnership between USF and the Bay Area Council over the issues around China, which are really important. And I think you've laid out just how important an issue we face here, and appreciate Dr. Sean Randolph's opening comments and the paper that he wrote. And I don't know, we didn't actually go to we didn't share notes on what to wear today, but we ended up wearing the same stuff, but it's okay. We got involved in China because the Bay Area Council determined from early in the new millennium that globalization was happening and was actually really an important aspect of our regional economy, San Francisco and Silicon Valley. And the more the world's economy became intertwined and globalized, the better we did, because we're in the middle of the innovation and the transactions here. So we started to think as an organization that had been around since World War II, how do you build on that? And we determined, and it was partly as a result of reports that were created by Sean and the Bay Area Council Economic Institute, one on China called The Ties That Bind, in which we really deeply analyze existing economic relationships, that we need to build on our international economic ties and figure out new ways in a new century and millennium to bring us closer. And so we started doing that on a number of fronts. And when we looked at the situation and the world economy and the physical positioning of the Bay Area as a central point of activity on the Pacific Rim, it didn't take us long to realize, and also given the history that you laid out about having the oldest Chinatown in America and the Gold Mountain and all of that, we decided, let's see if we could focus on China. We had some existing relationships. We made a couple of visits there. We received visitors from there, and we basically carved out the first sort of region to region economic partnership that we know of in history. We couldn't find another one actually between the Bay Area region and the Yangtze region in China. So we announced that. There was a lot of excitement about it. The governments on both sides were interested in it. The business communities were interested in it, and off we went. And we went about creating some memoranda of understanding about how we would work together. And we ultimately, a few years later, we actually started setting up offices in China, which remain today. And the goal, in the very beginning of this, so we're going back to about 2006-07 here, in the beginning, it was really about kind of helping China. The United States, through this policy of engagement, how can we do more to see China through the changes that it was going through, but with an eye toward the reality that this was going to be a two-way street, that it was going to lead toward more economic opportunities for our region, as well as for the Yangtze region and for Greater China and the United States. And that's what took place in the short period of a few years. We started to see, as Sean explained, tremendous interest here in the Bay Area from Chinese companies and wealthy individuals and real estate and companies. And this was all very, very positive. Also student engagements, Paul mentioned the interest in the Obama administration in youthifying the point of connection. And so at one of our friends and supporters, Florence Fang, helped the Obama administration establish the 100,000 strong China program, which was very, very successful. Brought a lot of American students over to China to learn about the culture and the business and vice versa. So everything was going really well. And I attended, I think it was about a decade ago, I attended the World Development Forum in Beijing, and I was listening to the translations from the premier and others. And I couldn't believe what I was hearing, because what we'd heard before was that China was pretty reluctant about international investment. Really wanted, they wanted these economic relationships if they benefited China very, very directly. And beyond that, it was really hard to get investment, and it was hard to do business in China. By this point, what I heard in the earphones, I was wondering if the translator was getting it right. The premier was directing the Chinese government and the Sovereign Wealth Fund to invest in America and invest in countries around the world, and to be aggressive about it and to be measured upon the performance of actually so doing, which to me was just, frankly amazing. And I wondered if they meant it, and they certainly did. From that point, for the next few years, we were visited upon by groups of folks coming to America with the, and as Sean said, they always came to San Francisco. So usually they would head from New York, sometimes LA, a lot of times Las Vegas, but you can understand. And they would come and they would make investments. They wanted us to help make introductions and so forth. So that's what was going on. And of course, we were heavily reliant. We became increasingly reliant on Chinese visitation. At one point, I think the numbers were just so startling that a visitor from China to San Francisco spent something like 5 times as much as a visitor from Europe every single day that they were in San Francisco in retail. I mean, these are really big numbers. And beyond that, the friendships that we developed, the closeness that came over doing this over a number of years was really astounding. And it gave me I developed the belief that, China was very, very sincere in wanting to build a relationship with the United States, that the people of China respected the United States and appreciated the United States role in World War II, where we came to the aid of China. And there was no enmity toward the United States from anything that I ever saw. Maybe healthy competition, but not even so much that. Now we've moved from engagement to and collaboration, cooperation. Those were the words of the time. Engagement maybe, competition, but I think it's really become, unfortunately, more about confrontation. And in visits that we made to Washington, D.C. before the pandemic, both parties, or even during through virtual means, there are really deep concerns about what's going on in China and what it means to America. And there's a view that's being put forward that somehow if China succeeds, America fails, which is, it really runs counter to everything that we believed and we're trying to do. Now, I cannot speak for the intentions of President Xi, as and the Chinese government. And I really can't even speak for the intentions of President Biden, of course, because I'm not part of the administration. So I'm an observer to it. But there is I was watching Fareed Zakaria a couple of days ago on CNN and was really surprised to see the strength of his comments about concerns about China. And this is being absorbed by the American people. And I would say the American people are developing a deep, deep distrust for what's going on in China, and somehow how this could potentially affect their life. And so, in fact, while we would have thought that the tariffs would have been eased by this point, they haven't been. There has been a better, I think the quality of the talk has improved, and there is more talk of working together. There's been a little bit of easing of student visas, at least for existing students. There's more talk in the Biden administration about easing immigration and undoing some of the things that President Trump announced, especially during the latter part of his presidency. But on the whole, you can see that and I would also say the conversation around joint cooperation on climate change, which is a good sign and certainly a new beginning for a relationship. But there's a long way to go here, and my sense is that our new administration in Washington is on guard. And as Sean mentioned, there's a whole bunch of bills out there, and those bills reflect interests of constituencies, and that President Biden and his team are very cautious about doing anything where they could be accused of being pro-China, soft on China, these kinds of things. And I think it's really inherent upon us as leaders in the community to at least be part of a dialogue and try to explain the bigger picture of this. And without saying that, I can't defend the Chinese government on some of the things that are happening there. I'm not expert in those things. I think, anything that any government is doing bears the deep understanding, to really look at is what's the history of this situation, and why might they be doing what they're doing, whether it's China or the United States or the UK or whoever you're looking at. But at the end of the day, it doesn't serve us well if these two countries are in conflict. And from a business, going back to the question that you asked, the business community feels a lot of consternation over this. And there is a sense, and this is based on polls that have been done and so forth by the US-China Business Council, that there's a negative set of beliefs out there by business in how this relationship will move forward. And that's unfortunate, and it's something I think we should address.
So there's definitely a lot of negative trends. So Paul, what have you seen in terms? You mentioned that student numbers dropped from China. So I guess that's kind of the impact. I'd be interested to hear from both of you. Like, how are your how are you or your organizations and people responding to these trends? Are they what are the direct impacts on them that they've noticed that you can share with us? And then how have you reacted? So Paul, why don't you go first and tell us like how USF and maybe other institutions are trying to help maintain these positive aspects of the relationship in difficult times.
Personally, my first visit to China was the summer of 1991, and I went to Xiamen, and I taught at the Education College. I had 30 students who were Chinese high school teachers teaching English. And Deng Xiaoping's government wanted to switch from teaching English the way we teach Latin, right, text to text, to actually a spoken language for commerce and for tourism and for kind of people-to-people stuff. Xiamen was pretty simple back then. I go to China normally, before the pandemic, I go once or twice a year. And it's not just Shanghai and Beijing, it's cities across the country are so impressive. And the wealth and the advances are just spectacular. And, people's ability to freely express their thoughts and feelings is breathtaking. One of our alums, Wei Jin Shan, who's based in Hong Kong and has an investment firm, PAG, published an article recently saying, China is a lot more capitalistic than people think. There's an entrepreneurial spirit. So back to USF. So, prior to the Trump administration, we would have 3 or 4 visa denials a year out of the 1,500 incoming first-year students. Early in the Trump administration, that jumped up to 26 to 28 visa denials a year. And even those who got visas reported being treated really rudely and with a great deal of suspicion at our consulates and embassies around the world. And there was not a change in personnel, there was a change in direction. There was a change in policy. That has, under the Biden administration, been reversed. It's breathtaking how quickly a bureaucracy, even as one as big as ours, can change their procedures. During the pandemic, we had to set up outdoor classrooms so that our international students, including our Chinese students, could come for in-person instruction so that they could maintain their visas. Otherwise, they were going to be deported. Again, this is not how you treat people who are going to be lifelong ambassadors between, for example, the United States and China. And we had a lot of our Chinese students who were living in the city. One thing that our Chinese families like to do is they like to buy some real estate in San Francisco. And it's very easy to do that when you have a student, a full-time college student. And then when the student graduates and goes back home, they may well keep that piece of property, as a way of, as an investment. But we had about 400 of our Chinese students, if I could use the expression, shanghaied in China during the pandemic. So we reached out and made a deal with Fudan University in Shanghai, which is arguably the second best university in the country, so that our Chinese students, USF students, could take a study abroad program at Fudan for USF classes. And the leadership at Fudan could not have been nicer, more accommodating, more welcoming. Fun historical fact, Fudan University was founded in 1904 by the Jesuits. We kind of lost it in 48, but the friendship endures.
So Jim, how about on your side, what are you seeing, how are businesses, over the past few years, there's so many other things going on with, the coronavirus and the pandemic in general, but like over the last few years, as there's been more hostility and, more trade frictions, how have you seen that affect kind of business strategies and business decisions that they're making? And is it, it sounds like from Paul's perspective, things are getting a little bit better on the academic side, at least for student visas. But there's a lot of tensions in the rest of the economic side of the relationship. So yeah, so how are people, how's it affecting them and how are they adapting?
Great question. And of course it varies. And by the way, I've spent a lot of time at Fudan and lectured there, and our office of the Bay Area Council in Shanghai is right across the street from Fudan University, where the husband of our leader there is a professor. So we feel a strong sense of attachment, and it is a great history. So I think the USF partnership with Fudan is well placed. Of course, it depends on the industry. And China's been more welcoming to some than others, where they feel that the presence of a United States or a Bay Area company suits a need that they would like to see filled. So it really does depend. Some of our major companies here have been blocked pre-pandemic and pre-Donald Trump, like Google and Facebook, and those folks have had a really hard time entering the market. Visa did for a very long time, but now have joined. Tesla's doing very well. They're really well. They are unusual that a foreign-owned company, 100% owned foreign company, can establish the way they have, but they've agreed to help China market cars that are built in China to Europe. So, everybody's got to be willing to do something. And the government probably has a rational view that, in a market like China's, they have some expectations of the folks who are doing business over there, as we do and other countries do. I go back to what you said earlier about the business. China's government is kind of like a business where the leaders of the government are really held accountable for economic growth. There's numbers they have to hit in their particular district, in their city, in their province in order to get promoted. And, so there's a real, I think, interest in the part of China in kind of getting it done right to achieve the kind of things the government wants to do. So if what you're doing as a company fits those kinds of needs, you're in a position to be successful in working with China, all of the politics aside. Now, China's made it in the last few years, and the United States has, created this relationship that's now much more difficult. I think in the beginning, there was hope that what Trump was doing would lead to better relationships. We'll put this kind of bluster out, but China will respond, and then we'll negotiate something. And he was all about bilateral rather than multilateral relationships and so forth. And so, we'll cut a deal with all these different countries, especially China, and then things will get better. Well, it basically didn't happen that way, but there was some signs that it might and that it could get better. And as you recall, he would say from time to time, good things about Xi Jinping and then not nice things about him. And I think from a business standpoint, everyone was kind of hopeful that it would get better. And what we have so much invested in China, we need to stay the course. I think now people are wondering whether there's going to be major changes in the supply chain that really haven't happened yet. As Sean mentioned, we're still seeing a lot of busyness at the California ports of goods coming in from China despite the tariffs. But whether or not that is able to continue, given the pressures that are out there, there's some real interest in the United States, I think, of shifting things. And so I think businesses are getting nervous. Some businesses have had to pull back. Apple has had to do that. I do think that the gut feeling in the business community is that President Biden would like to have a more collaborative relationship with China and with his counterpart, Xi Jinping, and that if he could accomplish that, he would, and that maybe there's some approach that they're taking to do that. And that's my hope, that that's happening, because the alternative, I think, is really would be really unacceptable. As you said, if you end up in this kind of zero-sum game, it's going to hurt both countries, certainly going to hurt us. We're already seeing higher prices for materials and goods that we need and people rely upon, and it's inflationary, and I think it misses the opportunity that exists. And I think most people in business feel that way about it, but business people have to be they're oriented toward adjusting to environments, and the environment is not shifting in the direction we'd like to see it shift.
Follow up on that. One area that affects, I think, both academic and business interactions is kind of and it goes along with the general kind of zero-sum approach to the relationship, is this concern about what the FBI calls non-traditional intelligence collecting, which is the idea that sort of not just like spies, but just kind of any person. Honestly, sometimes it feels like any person, even of Chinese ancestry, so it's very easily can spill over into outright racism. But, there's this idea that the Chinese government is going to use anyone who's here to try to extract, secret information. And sometimes even not even secret information, just like they'll learn all our tricks. They'll learn about AI. I mean, actually, you mentioned this before, Jim. They'll learn about AI. They'll learn about biotechnology, nanotech. And so therefore we need to somehow, close the doors before they come in, and they're going to somehow learn it and then somehow do it better than us, and then defeat us. Again, very, I'm not my antagonistic viewpoint, but kind of implicit in this thing. So how have you seen impacts of that? Or is there any response that educational institutions or businesses can take to ameliorate the impact of this?
I think there's some genuine concerns that are out there about, teaching people from foreign countries sensitive information. So I think it's up to the country and the institutions that serve to not paint with a broad brush. So you mentioned being, providing a 4-year liberal arts education to students from China, which creates a value-added university experience for people. And I think it would be very, very unfortunate if that got caught up with certain teaching certain things to certain people which may be more sensitive. And maybe we just do have to figure out how to better draw the line on that. I think there's enough sensitivity about that at this point that we need a solution for it. I don't think it's realistic for us to say, come on, the Chinese mean us no harm. They're just trying to develop their own society. Let them, let's just share. I don't think that's pragmatic or realistic at this time. And so I don't see sort of a global open source system emerging. So I think what we could do better, and what I think we're trying to do, is say, okay, what is genuinely at risk, and let's develop programs to avoid the risk. I'd say, you mentioned before also about China. This is a little off subject, but maybe it ties in, is that anyone who's visited China or heard about it, you've seen this incredible development in a short period of time. China has moved its society forward within a couple of generations in ways that are hard to imagine could have been accomplished. And I think there's a lot of the people are fretting about it here, and they're looking at this country that's advancing faster than we are, and it's being suggested that somehow they're being able to do it because we're giving them the tools to do it with, which I think is, to the extent that their society is moving forward and they're able to do things better because they learned something in the United States about how to do it, I don't see that as a bad thing. And I think we probably have some things to learn from China, as was put forward as well. So, but I also think that maybe it's the case that people here in the United States are comfortable with China when China's not doing so well. When it's sort of a cultural thing. We can engage with you because we're better than you. But as soon as you show signs of moving past what we're able to accomplish, and basically China's done that by investing in the things we historically invested in, which were education and infrastructure and things like that. Now we're not so comfortable with you anymore, China. We don't want you to be better, and we don't like you much anymore. So I don't know. I don't know if that's a theory that's been tested. But with all of the recent, violence in the Asian American Pacific Islander community, it sort of begs the question: what is there something we want China to be that's different than China's being, and that sort of underlies this, or are these threats, very, very real? And people like myself, who like Father Fitzgerald, have visited China a couple of times a year and developed strong kind of feelings of closeness with the people there. We just don't really want to see the truth. And I'd like to know the answer to that question.
Paul, do you have anything you want to add on that front?
Yeah, the United States didn't balk at rebuilding Japan and Japan and Germany after the Second World War, and those two countries are thriving, today, and they benefit us because we're part of a global economy. Secondly, I'd say is that the United States has the best higher education system in the world. And half of all PhD candidates in the world are studying at American universities. And our universities thrive because of academic freedom. Academic freedom means that faculty are free to follow research questions and research interests without any control from their administration, without any control. And then where are their ideas proofed? Their ideas are proofed out in journals, at conferences, in peer review by faculty from other universities. Virtually all of the research that's done in the United States is intended to be published and given away to benefit humanity. And anybody who can read English can read these journals and learn all kinds of new technological developments, new developments in pure mathematics that leads to artificial intelligence, with a few rare exceptions where the Department of Defense is funding a research project at an R1 university, there you want to control the access to the discoveries there because it's going to go into a new weapons system or it's going to go into some new system. But that is the super rare exception. And actually, a lot of that work now is done by DARPA. The federal government, the Pentagon are doing their own research. So, this idea that we should in some way be suspicious of or exclude from PhD level education, the brightest of the brightest from China, is just silly. It's just silly. And by the way, China doesn't have enough seats in their universities to educate their own best and brightest. USF, we have a little program that we run every summer, and it's Chinese students who take their regional Gaokao exams. It's the leaving high school exam, and you have to be in the top 10% of the students in your region to get into a tier 1 Chinese university, Fudan or Beijing. And so what we do is we go to Chinese students who were in the 11th or 12th percentile. So these are super bright kids, but they don't want to go to a tier 2 university in China. It's not a good proposition for them. So, within a month, now that things return to normal, within a month, we can have a visa in their hand. So late June is when the Gaokao results are published. By late July, they have their visa. And in mid-August, they're in San Francisco, starting a program. That's at the undergraduate level. As I say, at the graduate level, it only helps. And the other thing is, PhDs around the world form networks of peers who generate new knowledge. New knowledge is a spark that happens when you have the intelligentsia of the human race, talking to itself across cultural boundaries and across cultural borders. And, just like a diverse group of US people is the most creative group, so a diverse group of international people is the most creative engine, as I say, of the creation of new knowledge.
That's absolutely true. I think, I'll just, as my 2 cents, I'll add it. It's funny for me, as someone who's been, traveling to China and studying it since 1989, actually. And back in the 90s and through the 2000s, and still to an extent, it's funny to hear like the Chinese government's actually worried about, they used to refer to as peaceful evolution, basically the sinister plot by Americans to, through our cultural, our cultural strength and our educational institutions and all our diversity of thought to, convince all of their people that they might want something maybe a little bit more like the version of democracy and human rights that we have here. And that this, was a reason for them to be afraid of sending students here. But of course, they got over it because, they realized that, to the extent, I'm not sure those concerns were entirely false. People don't change their minds in one day, but like we should feel proud of the system that we have in the U.S. and welcome students here. And if they learn to do a little bit of programming with AI and also learn a little bit about what's great about the American system, as well as its flaws, then I feel like that should be probably welcomed by both countries. So maybe why don't we move to policy a little bit? There's just beginning a dialogue now between the U.S. Trade Representative Catherine Tai and the Chinese Vice Premier Liu He, talking about it, the high-level trade stuff. But actually, I'd be interested if either of you had anything to say. And actually, the Bay Area Council has always been about region to region relations, right? So maybe none of us are going to be heard in DC, but if we could be heard in Sacramento or even local governments here, what are some of the things that maybe they should be thinking about or steps they could be taking, regardless of the trajectory of the national discourse, that would help move things forward in a positive way?
Yeah, we've been huge supporters of subnational relations. And of course, during Trump's presidency, we brought Governor Jerry Brown to China on 2 separate occasions to sign agreements with various provinces with China, including our sister state relationship in the Jiangsu province. And a lot of what we've done and are doing is to try to develop approaches to climate change and resiliency, working very closely with our counterparts there. And, I suspect, for us, I think it's something that California can do without asking for permission. I suspect in China, it takes a little bit of diplomacy on the part of the state and the province to be able to make sure that what they're doing is okay with their own government. But those are the kind of things that I think are really important that we can do. And we've gotten a lot of encouragement about doing that, even from the the Department of State here, even during President Trump's time, saying, you guys keep doing what you're doing. It's okay. We get that it's really important to have commerce and cooperation, but at the national level, it's a different story. So it's an interesting dichotomy there. So we're currently working on a program with Jiangsu province on this to see if we can't come up with a China version of the California Resilience Challenge, which is something we're doing here in our state, to develop solutions to things like fire and heat and drought and flood, which are the functional outcomes of climate change that we're seeing. And China's experiencing a lot of the same things, and we're all existing on the same planet. And the two countries now have seem to be going in the direction of mutual cooperation. And sometimes it's the test cases at the state levels, provincial levels, municipal levels can be very important in creating models that can then be brought forward. So these are just some of the opportunities that we have. Certainly, we've had educational exchanges, visitations, forums. We used to do a whole lot of that. And the pandemic has put a cloud on everything. We don't really know what the world looks like post-pandemic until we reach the point where I guess we're getting closer. But it would be my hope that at some point we'll be able to get back to being able to visit again. We do participate in a business forum that's really important to the Chinese in Shanghai. That's a major trade program that they have, which is about China investing and buying from foreign institutions, businesses, and governments. So we participate in that. And we may be the only U.S. participant in that, but we bring companies to it and so forth. And that's partly because it's in Shanghai, where we have the sort of the core relationship, but it's also because it's something that's paid close attention to by the government in Beijing.
I would add that Professor Xiaohua Yang, the founder and director of our China Business Studies Initiative, really has developed a terrific model where USF, we're an educational institution. And so what we do, so we'll invite American business people to come to USF and spend 3 weeks in a sort of a boot camp to learn the soft skills in order to be successful going to China and doing business, building new business relationships. And what are just the faux pas to avoid when you're at the feast, and when but also, how to greet people, who's the first person you talk to in the room, all those kinds of soft skills that are very necessary. And then we'll bring groups of Chinese business people, manufacturers, and they'll come to USF and spend, again, a 3-week intensive boot camp in, how do you develop the skills that are going to allow you to develop business relationships and be successful in a relationship with the American business community. That kind of, so universities, certainly we give bachelor's, master's, and doctoral degrees, but we can also be just a platform for engagement and a platform for learning beyond the typical structure of degree programs. And then, Peter, yourself and your colleagues, we're producing a lot of knowledge that we then publish. And again, just push it out there. This is like, okay, it costs you like $195 to subscribe to this journal, but you can go online and buy the article for $1. And we're not trying to make money. The journals make money off of the faculty work. Faculty will work like 6 months or 8 months and write an article, and it gets published in this great review, and they're super happy, and it's going to go on their tenure and promotion file, but they don't get a dime from the journal. And there's a certain joy in that kind of creation of knowledge and pushing it out for the benefit of humankind in general, but especially like right now in the relationship between the United States and China. I think this is the relationship of the next couple of decades that is either going to usher in another era of kind of progress, technological progress, but also cultural and human progress to get climate change under control, but also to lower the temperature on conflict, on political conflict and on military conflict. Henry Kissinger, I thought was a genius when he figured that the best way to have global peace is to have 5 super economic regions that are all mutually dependent on each other. Everybody's going to specialize in a couple of things that are essential for human thriving. So, we need, to come back to this point, but we need a good relationship with the People's Republic of China. There's just no way around it. And, we've got an embassy, Chinese embassy is just like 7 blocks from campus. And, we'll host the consul general or members of his staff for events on campus on a regular basis. That's the way it should be. That's normal. That's how normal people behave.
So just a reminder to the audience, if you have questions, you can put it into the Q&A. We've got a couple in now, so I'll start going through them. A couple of them were a little bit more macroeconomic policy focused, which I think is maybe a little bit beyond the scope of our central expertise here. So I'm gonna set those aside. But Bob Thelin from ChinaVest had the comment, said, "You're all making important points in framing the future relationship with China. To focus on the quality of life of China's middle class is an important opportunity. China's fast aging population means that geriatric care and medicine, education, and maintaining the unique roles of the Bay Area Council and USF are the basis of present and future relations. China horizontal means to focus on regional and municipal relations, which we've just been talking about. And in education, there's certain sensitive areas which should be protected, but certainly things like undergraduate and business education, there's really nothing but good that can come from that." But then he followed up with a particularly tough one. There are, as Sean Randolph mentioned at the beginning, there are a lot of concerns with human rights issues in China. And, those of us who are not new on the block realize there have been, concerns. There's we have very different views of human rights, and there's different things that have been going on for, for the entirety history of China, and certainly over the past 20, 40 years, there's always been something to be very concerned about. And so, but a lot of the concerns about that, especially with regards to the Uyghurs in Xinjiang, and also with relationship to Hong Kong, and even in terms of just general political openness, seems to have been reducing in recent years in China. So given these human rights concerns, what's the right way for private actors, educational institutions, businesses to interact with China? I mean, given if we're not talking about viewing them as taking that strategic adversary view and trying to avoid kind of full out conflict, since there are so many important areas of cooperation. But how do you deal with kind of this paradox or challenge?
That's a tough question. It's not a new question, because certainly in our experience, it gets back to Tiananmen Square and a lot of these issues that have been raised, throughout our time. But I would say, I'd go back to what we said initially, has been my view, and it was the view of my boss, Dianne Feinstein, when she was mayor of San Francisco, who established the Shanghai Sister City Committee back in the late 1970s, which is that the best strategy is the strategy of engagement. And that, you can, if you're talking and you're experiencing and you're getting to know people and you're building trust, that's really the ticket to being able to have conversations about these more touchy, locally, culturally based issues. And, I think if on the other hand, we're not talking and we're pointing fingers at each other, it's not going to bear results. I would say, maybe some of the things that have happened in China are a focus of China's, and I can't speak for China, but as I see this, China feels in some cases that they're doing a lot of things for their own country and for the world, and those things are being frowned upon. And therefore, if we're let's just do what we then might have done otherwise if we weren't in an engaged global enterprise, right? And China also, I will say, for certain, looks back at the United States and says, let's take a look at some of the human rights issues in the United States, and you should, why don't you solve your own problems with overt racism and violence against African Americans and Asian American, Pacific Islanders, and all the things that we're seeing all the time before you criticize us, because you haven't solved that. So I don't know. These are very, very difficult. But the Bay Area Council's approach to this was that we're basically an economic group. We're not diplomats. Some of these things are they're beyond our scope for sure. But if you boil it all down, if we're talking, if we're meeting, if we're looking for the opportunities to work together, we'll have a better chance at having real conversations about how to solve some of those other things, and probably be more effective in having those with their government. If there's some benefit on the other side, that the government say, hey, look, we want to work with the United States and they're concerned about this. We need to take it. We need to take it seriously.
I would just underline the last several points that Jim made there. We do have a history of the extermination of the native peoples as the Europeans came to North America. We have the history of slavery and perduring racism against Black people in this country. And, but we've got this great, Judeo-Christian tradition that has these foundational notions that every person is image and likeness of God. What are the great deep resources in China's 5,000 years of high civilization? And how might we, as two nations, kind of go deep into the best ideals that are part of our culture, part of our identity, that we've never fully achieved. But instead of, as Jim says, pointing fingers at each other and saying, you're worse than we are, how might we kind of try to figure out ways to articulate what it is to respectfully engage in exchange between cultures, and to respectfully engage in a search for a foundation of a universal human right, which is more than a legal guarantee. It's got to be a kind of a transcendent human insight. And what does Dostoevsky said? Beauty will save the world. So China has, as I say, 5,000 years of aesthetic theory and aesthetic practice, and the production of beautiful, beautiful objects, which are not simply to please the eye, but they are to inspire the soul. And we have in this Western tradition similar depths of wisdom and insight and challenge. And we have to challenge ourselves. We should not be challenging each other. We should challenge ourselves to hear our own better angels and listen to them.
One person's asking more from the individual perspective. So we sort of, we can think about as country to country, what might they do, and, government to government at more of the local levels. And then for the, as members of institutions, educational and business, is there anything that you would recommend for just ordinary citizens to keep in mind to support positive educational and business interchanges between the two countries?
I would say that in the Bay Area, we have benefited in this region by being a very diverse and accepting community. I think anybody who comes here feels that, and your university is a proxy for it. And people do better, businesses do better when universities do better, cultures do better when they have the opportunity to learn and engage in exchange. And I think most people understand that kind of inherently. And we can be a leadership region on this. We can speak out on this because we have had the experience of having a very successful culture, a very successful society, a very successful economy through the interwoven contributions of many different communities, including the Chinese. And the Chinese community is very much a part of our Bay Area community. We had one group a few years ago that came, was a delegation from Shanghai came, and we took them to their first meeting. They got off the plane and they came to Oracle. And we took them to Oracle, and so we had about 10 of them, and it was just in the morning, and we were waiting in the lobby, and every person who went in to go to work was Chinese. for a while, right? It's about 15, 20 minutes while we're waiting. And the district director there looked at me and says, you did this for us, right? You set this up so that we would feel at home. Of course, I said, no, these are the people who work at this company. They're Asian people who are very much part of this company and this community. And, I think that's, we're not the only region in the country that benefits from this. And I think we should build on it, and we should thoughtfully do it. And I would look forward to working with USF on how to do it, because I think we share the value of it and we understand it. And so I think one of the things about doing these webinars is you learn, it makes you think, and we should come back and come up with the next stage of our relationship in order to hasten and foster this kind of approach.
Yeah, USF, as I said, for decades and decades, we've been more than 100 years educating, either the children of Chinese immigrants or students directly from China. And then, our alums take two pathways. One would be the pathway that Alfred Chuang took. Alfred came to us from Hong Kong, class of '82. After he graduated, he went to Davis, got a master's degree, and then we worked for Sun Microsystems, and then was a founder of BAE, which was sold to Oracle. And his newest company is called Magnet Systems. And as an immigrant technology entrepreneur, Alfred has created tremendous wealth and great jobs and great technologies that have made our lives wonderful. His son, Magnet Systems, provides a key aspect of the Salesforce platform at some deep level. Don't ask me how, it's magic, I don't know. But then, another type of student would be Wei Jin Shan, who during the Cultural Revolution was sent out to the Gobi Desert. He's got an autobiography called Out of the Gobi. There's a whole chapter from his undergraduate years at USF, where he earned a bachelor's degree. Earned his master's in business administration here. Then he was a partner to Dick Blum. He was a professor at the Wharton School. He had a tremendous, but now he's back in Hong Kong. And PAG is his global investment firm. And Sean's whole investment strategy is investing in the Chinese domestic market for the emergent middle class. And he's kindly let USF put money into several of his funds, and they've, who knew 10-cent streaming music would have such an amazing IPO, but we did well. And then Dixon Dahl has, done Dahl Capital Management, China Turbo Fund, also amazing returns. So again, the relationship of a university is to educate individual people. I'm always amazed when I meet European descended, white American students here who are learning Mandarin and, majoring in international business, and they want to be these personal ambassadors back and forth across the Pacific Ocean. And the more ambassadors we have, the more Pacific that ocean is going to be.
Well, I think that's a great note to end on. Sorry to those of you who had some questions we didn't get time to address today, but I want to say thanks again to our audience and to President Wunderman and President Fitzgerald for taking the time today to share their perspectives and teach us more about what's going on in the Bay Area and how that relates to this perpetually challenging but also crucial relationship. So thank you, everyone. I think we'll call it a day.